Looking at our text from Philippians today, according to St. Paul, there are really only two patterns for life. There's God's pattern, and there's everything else. Now, obviously, there are many variations on those two patterns, or we wouldn't have so many different denominations within Christianity, variations even within those denominations. But when one has sorted everything out, it comes down to one either follows Christ or one follows human beings. God's way is work. God's way is bearing crosses. But God's way ends in eternal glory. The religions of man, well, they tend to like to have their glory right now, one way or another. But they all end in eternal destruction. St. Paul says, many walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their destiny is destruction. Now, enemies. Enemies does not mean people who hate Christians. An enemy of the cross is anyone who believes that Christ's death on the cross was unnecessary or incomplete. So really, some of the nicest, fairest, most well-meaning people on earth might be enemies of the cross. And destruction. Destruction is not anything so nice as an end to one's existence. Sadly, destruction means eternal damnation. Destruction means that we continue to exist, only in hell. So our lives may be led in pursuit of Christ, which ends in glory, or our lives may be led in pursuit of destruction. One or the other is always true, and there honestly is no gray area on this one. Strangely enough, Christians are the only ones who have a choice of which life to lead. A person who has been claimed by the Holy Spirit has the choice. A person who has not been claimed by the Holy Spirit and then set on that path to glory has no choice of what to pursue except to pursue destruction. It's the only path available to him. But for we Christians, it's a different story. We've been claimed in baptism. We have been set upon the right path. And now we have a choice. Stay on the path on which we've been set, or reject that path in pursuit of destruction. A life in pursuit of Christ, honestly, does not look particularly fun to our sinful nature. It looks a lot like following rules, like self-discipline. A life that's not in one's best interest for fun and entertainment, and sometimes even happiness. And Jesus never tried to sugarcoat it. He told us what it was like right from the beginning. I mean, he was born in a stable, laid in a feeding trough. He was the son of a carpenter. He was a friend to tax collectors and prostitutes and lepers and all the scum of society. There is no possible way to look at the life of Jesus and think somehow that a Christian will find glory here on earth. I mean, if Jesus were standing right here in the flesh with us right now, he would not be wearing a Rolex, and he did not arrive driving a Bentley. So I guess it's not surprising that some people choose to pursue destruction. Even people who were given the choice and set on the right path as Christians might choose to pursue destruction. Because there's not a moment of a day that Satan's not working on us. Not trying to get us to leave God's path. I mean, it's like we walk down a carnival midway with him barking on either side of us. Come this way and experience all the pleasure you've never known. Come this way and receive the riches of the world. Come this way for excitement. Come this way for fun. Come any of these ways and you can be like God. Don't you believe him? All of those ways end in destruction. So Paul wrote this letter to Philippians. Philippi was a Roman colony, a military retirement colony. And as a Roman military retirement colony, I'm guessing it did not resemble a monastery in any way whatsoever. This city was made up of men who had spent a career of being self-disciplined and self-controlled. And now Paul was coming to them and telling them that they're supposed to continue in that walk in retirement. And remember, please, that the Romans were known for their excesses. These are the days just preceding Emperor Caligula, of which many of you have heard stories. I mean, excess and debauchery were the words of the day. But one thing that a soldier can understand, one thing that Paul hits them with, because they can understand it, is glory. In a military campaign, there comes a time when one may have to trade immediate glory for final glory. A soldier understands that it's better to lose several battles if that means winning the war in the long run. So Paul calls them, and us, by the way, to true and final glory. An enemy of the cross's destiny is destruction. And these soldiers would have seen plenty of destruction in their day, and yet nothing they had seen even approached the kind of destruction St. Paul was describing. Complete and utter desolation, complete separation from everyone you love, unspeakable pain, best described in the simple phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me? And when faced with that kind of destruction, no amount of pleasure in this life is worth it. No one would trade an eternity of agony for a few years of pleasure. But I think there are many people in our world today, people all around us, who just don't understand it. And maybe it's because we haven't been pointed enough with them. I mean, medical doctors, I think, do a better job than theologians in describing the horror that you will face. They tell their patients, if you don't take this medicine, not only will you die, but you will die a horrible death. And they'll go into great lengths to describe how horrible that death will be. But the fate is far worse for anyone who ignores Jesus. Conversely, the one who spoke that simple phrase from the cross, the one who calls us to follow him into glory, his glory is unimaginable. Glorious bodies, glorious lives, glorious Eden awaiting our return. No cross carried in this life will seem the least bit heavy when we enter that glory. That's what Jesus meant when he told us that his yoke was light. When we're walking with Jesus, he joins us. And the yoke and all the burdens of this life are just a little bit lighter until we cross into paradise, when that yoke is completely lifted off of us. But how can we be sure? I mean, if we're being called to pass by all of the pleasure and all of the fun of this life, and bear the pain of carrying various crosses at various times, I want to be sure I know that Paul knows what he's talking about. Well, Paul was a Pharisee. He knew the Old Testament, probably could recite most of it from memory. And Paul knew about a man named Noah who had followed the hard path when quite literally everyone else had abandoned God's path. I know we blithely say everybody's doing it, but Noah's day, everybody really was doing it. And God promised Noah that if he would follow the righteous path, he and his family would be saved from the coming destruction. He did. And they were. And Paul knew about a man named Abraham who was promised that if he would follow the righteous path, he would become the father of many nations, even though he was childless and an old man already. He followed Paul. And Paul knew that he was part of that promised fulfillment, as are we. And Paul knew about a man named Joshua who was promised that if he would follow God's path, the walls of a great and fortified city called Jericho would simply fall down in front of him. Joshua did, and the promise was kept. Promise after promise after promise, right up into the promise that in 3 days he would rise from the dead, and he did. So do the math. If no promise has ever been broken in thousands of years, well, why would this promise be broken? Why would any promise he ever makes be broken? Jesus has promised to return for us. One day he will come and he will gather all of us up, everyone who is walking on his path, and we will receive glory beyond any earthly comprehension. And why would this even be hard to believe? I mean, we've seen giant arcs ride out floods. We've seen great seas parted. We have seen walls of cities blown down by trumpets. And we have seen the dead raised. So press on. Stand firm in the Lord. And never forget the glory that awaits us in the end.